Thank you very much. And I hope I am audible to people. And at one level, I find this a very exciting subject. And the question is, at one level, very provocative. The question that I was asked to share my perspective on was that with the evolving role of leaders, how will the hiring framework, get impacted in the new normal? So, my first question is, what is going to be fundamentally so new? It's nice to talk about novelty and post-COVID and the world has changed. In many ways, it has changed, but I believe in many other ways, the strategic imperative of leadership and hiring for leadership uh, has remained the same. And and therefore, I don't want to start by saying that suddenly we need a different breed of leaders and we need a very different way of hiring leaders. And I think it may sound fashionable to kind of repackage stuff, but I would rather prefer to play safe and say that actually what has changed. And more importantly, while there is a lot of intellectual support to the cause for change, how much of it is actually changing on the ground when the bullet is actually fired? So I think that's the real opening caveat that I want to leave as a thought with you. And I also wanted to, when I looked at that subject, I want to be very clear. When you hear the word hiring, almost everyone believes hiring must be external. And I believe talent hiring is not always an external activity. It is as much an internal activity. It must include internal hiring. It must include career advancement. So when I say internal hiring, it's your entire job mart that you kind of run in different companies, allowing people the opportunity to apply for different jobs and really being a very alive job market within. And if you're wanting to look for leaders in the new normal, then you need to also look internally, because otherwise you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I think there is a bit of a disconnect that I see in many organizations where, we talk about succession planning and talent and stuff internally, but when it comes to hiring, it's literally you go outside and you start hiring. So I just want to put some of these issues in perspective. Now, if I were to start, I want to first reiterate my point that I don't think the fundamentals of what we look for in hiring a leader would change. Now, look at some of the buzzwords that you've been hearing over the last so many years, and what of that does not apply in the context that we are in today. Maybe some of them will get a little accentuated, maybe some of them will be a little on the back burner, and this rejig of some bit of the priority from that entire basket would depend on the context of each organization and what is their operating context, rather than an across the board list of priorities. But some of the things that you would look for beyond functional skills will be things around curiosity. I mean, in times like these, I would love to look forward to a hiring program which actually is able to look for dimensions around curiosity, courage, the willingness to take risks, resilience, issues around empathy, the way you lead people, the way you handle their emotional state, agility. Agility is a huge mindset. Humility, because today, without humility, no leader can say, I am complete in myself. You can learn from anyone, almost anywhere and any time. So humility is very important. Learnability is important. Issues around influence and not control becomes very, very critical. So, if you look at that entire basket of competencies and behaviors, I personally don't think that they did not exist in the old world, or the old normal, so to speak. But and therefore, I am a little hesitant when people suddenly start thinking, now we need a different leadership. No, you don't need a different leadership. What actually the crisis and the post-crisis reality has shown us, and to be very honest, is we've not done our jobs well enough. And that is why this issue really gets to become a question. We've not done our job well enough in the past. And we must, whether we are the board or we are the CEOs or we are the CHROs, we must hold ourselves responsible and guilty of not having prepared ourselves for this, even if it was a black swan event, because all of this was on someone's list or the other all the time. We've been running conferences for years talking about these things. So my big question really is, why does the hiring actually fail at the end of the day to pick adequate leadership dimensions? Is it an issue of indifference? Is it an issue of wanting more convenient leaders? Is it an issue of the processes lacking rigor? Is it that financial numbers are easy to count? Hiring a leader who is beyond a point bothered, or maybe there is no accountability. And these are questions which I believe must be put on the mat today. And through this keynote, that's what I would want the new world to be looking at. Hold people accountable for this big job. Get them to do it with sincerity. Get them to do it with the intent of making oneself redundant. Part of the problem is the people who are hiring don't want to be redundant, don't want to look at doing something else. And therefore, you're choking the entire ecosystem. And the solution will not come by hiring people and filling a role or a position. It is really about thinking more strategically about leadership. And therefore, my first point, I want to talk 4 or 5 points in the little time that I have. The first point that I want to leave you guys with is, as I look, and this is my wish list. I'm not saying this will happen. I wish these things happen. So the first is focus on leadership, not leaders. Hire for leadership. Look around for leadership and not for leaders. This bias of looking at leaders, and some of you who read what I write would be familiar. I've been trying to talk about it in almost every message or article I write. Leadership is different than the leader. And positional leaders and job mandates and job roles, is what we run after. That's not going to solve your problem, because that has not solved your problem so far. The issue is leadership. And that is where I personally believe we have not been honest enough. We have found it more convenient to hire average, mediocre, convenient leaders rather than leaders who will challenge the system, challenge the board, challenge the promoter, because you don't want really that. You want a convenient leadership. And this is my provocation, and this must change. And a lot of that will happen when you start talking about leadership as an entity exercise and not as a role closure exercise. So it's a very important dimension, and I leave it at that in terms of the provocation that is there. Having said this, the other big thing that I think in the new normal, and I'm using your words of the new normal only because that's the context in which I've been asked to speak. Look at the more gig type of hiring for leadership. It's a big mindset shift. In the last some months, and I do a bit of help with talent as well, and I advise clients more on a strategic retainer. And I tell them this issue that, you are not likely to get the best of guys as a full-time employee. And the guys who want a full-time employee may not be the kind of leaders that you necessarily will find adequate. And therefore, get flexible with hiring people who are able to give you some part of their day, week, month, whatever it is, to help you actually get that strategic leadership gap better filled. And this entire shift from moving from a captive employment-based leader to supplementing or reinforcing your leadership through the gig approach is a big shift in thinking that I think companies need to do, but it's not happening enough. Intellectually, people come and talk about these things, but when push comes to shove, I don't see much of that shift really happening. And it is important because it starts all the way from the board. Look at the quality of your boards. Your leadership tone and the kind of leadership that you want is set by the kind of board. But the boards, again, happen to have the same kind of guys on almost every board. So you're trying to solve what I always say, a pediatric problem with a geriatric solution. People looking at what was relevant in the 70s or 80s or 90s to solve a problem which is here, and then it flows down to hiring your C-suite and then at different levels of leadership. So, my approach is that while you need regular 24/7 role holders in companies, leadership can be supplemented, reinforced, upgraded, and you get a lot of strategic wisdom by actually taking talent to those possibilities beyond the box. And this is what hiring has to get to think differently. Search firms, I don't think, are imaginative either. They go for a mandate of a regular job, long list, short list, and present the guys, and someone gets closed at the end of 6 months. To me, it's a very old world way of looking at leadership problems and talent and strategic talent problems. I think the world must shift to saying, you know what, Mr. Client, this is really your leadership gap, and particularly in the new world, this is what is missing. When I look at your mix of leaders today, you need to supplement by getting someone who is able to do this and this and this. And therefore, you get talent to explore those possibilities, which may not be a full-time possibility. So I am wanting to question that, does the old equation necessarily work in today's world, given the challenges, given the issues and the gaps, and the best guys may not be wanting to be captive to one organization or to a standard employment job. So it's a big change for companies, their boards, their CEOs, their CHROs, the search industry, to be looking at their hiring mechanism and completely reverse the equation. So this is another food for thought and a provocation that I thought I would leave for all of you to think about. The other thing that I have been pondering as I listen to different people who call me for opinion, advice, and help is they are trying to get, historically, just a plug and play guy. He's worked in these companies in the same industry and can hit the ball, he can hit the road running. Now, this was the classical old world view of looking at leadership. I think this must be questioned. And we must start looking more at inter-industry shifts for leadership talent. And my thesis also stems to my own experience. Even 15, 18 years back, I would hire people from other industries into industries which were very different and where I was working. And it's continued my CXO tenures in almost every organization. And my logic is simple. And particularly in the so-called new world, it becomes even more pronounced, emphatic, and confirmed or validated. You know, when you get people who have seen the problem with the same pair of eyes, with the same blinds, just move companies because the guy is ready from day one, the problem you run is he is as blind as you were before he or she joined you. Because it's the same problem, it's the same function, it is the same agenda. It's except that, the jersey has changed. I think the new world and the new leadership would do well by trying to learn from perspectives of other people. And this is something that, and I've moved across sectors, and I can tell you every industry believes it is unique. Every industry believes it is unique. In some ways, maybe it is. But at another level, I can tell you, every leadership, and I'm talking about leadership, every leadership which has learnability, which is agile in its thinking, learning, can ask the right questions, is fungible. And you actually are able to look at problems which hitherto were not spotted. You're able to problem solve in a way that was different and alien to that company. And I don't have the time to give you examples, but trust me, it has worked in almost 99% of my hiring decisions that I made, of getting people to move from, consumer industry to automobiles, or to move from an FMCG sector into pharmaceuticals, and so on and so forth. And I think at leadership levels, it works brilliantly. And I think we all gain in terms of perspective, and more importantly, the pluralistic hiring actually lends itself to pluralistic thinking. And in a world which is topsy-turvy, pluralism in thought is more important than the old D&I initiatives, which in any case I believe are a little over the hill and beaten to death with. So use your leadership hiring practices and your decisions to not only relook the nature of the association of leadership, the nature of getting that leadership in, but also about looking beyond the same fish pond that we typically look at. I also believe, which is my fourth point, is that we should actually move away from this job description based hiring. Now, in a very static world, it made sense because you wrote down those 10, 12 things, and till death do us apart, it will not change. And therefore, it made sense. I don't believe job descriptions today can really be the basis for leadership hiring. And again, from my experience, I have found that individuals actually, underwhelm the job description or overwhelm the job description. The right guy redefines the job far, far differently than what you and I had initially thought. And you hire an average leader, even that same job description seems to have shrunk. But again, it's a practice that I think is very cliched, very dead, very dried and dusted, and actually very static for the world, which is the ever-changing world that we all are in. And therefore, the quality of the impact of leadership can be very, very different if we do not constrain it by a job description. Right. And at leadership levels, I honestly don't think that we should be having a job description. And I still find 2-page, 3-page note of a job description. Most of it is cliched. Most of these are tasks. And for me, leadership is not about just the execution of the task. You're not an individual contributor. Your job is to get a larger agenda delivered. And not everything is in the job description. Then why do we waste that time of writing a JD when we should actually be trying to spend our time wooing people, the gig variety or from another industry or whichever way, to help join us and make sure that that person, when you get that person on board, is able to unleash oneself into the new ecosystem rather than be expected to conform to practices just because we say we are different. We don't do things like this in our setup or our company. I think so. Therefore, it's an issue of, is the tail going to wag the dog, or actually it will be whatever it is. The last point that I want to, again, talk about is, in the new world, I personally believe if it is a new world, and at some places it is not really a new world, I think it's a very, very disappointing mindset. Not only with recruiters, not only with the hiring managers, but I think the entire ecosystem which looks at hiring. Let me share with you a small example of what I mean by this. I once worked and had a colleague, a peer in the management team, a lady who said that, HR is not helping me get the right people. And I said, what's the problem? And he says, I'm looking for someone with 20 years of experience, and HR is giving me profiles with 15 years of experience. And long story short, I gave her a piece of paper and pen, and this was before a set of people, by the way, the management team. And I said, please write down 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And the person said, but why? And I said, just write it down. And after she had written this down, I said, now you please write down what would have changed at the end of year 15, year 16, year 17, year 18, year 19, and so on. Guess what happened? The paper was blank. And the point, therefore, I'm saying is, at what point does it become irrelevant? And in a new world, I think this is going to get lower. I think we need to take greater risks with our own talent. We need to take greater risks with younger talent from the outside. We need not to be bound by this 20 years of experience. I was trying to help hire a CHRO for a well-known company recently. And the person said, we need a person who is in the early 40s. Why? What if it's 39? What if it's 45? I mean, does it really make a difference? So this entire obsession with, earlier I said JD, and now it's about experience and age, again gets me to think we are trying to solve a new age problem, but still have an old age mindset. And your hiring mechanism, your hiring experience, your hiring methodology, the people who, the questions that you hire through, what do you probe, what do you ask, will all be so different. So I personally believe, bet on your people, either from within or from outside. And especially if they are within, as I wrote an article, I think 6 years back, it was something like, bet on your talent before or else someone else will. This I wrote 5-6 years back. And this is really part of your internal hiring mechanism. And similarly, again, because I had the benefit, I must confess, of someone who took a bet on me very early in my career, and others harvested it. Why did that guy take a bet on me? He could also have said that, well, you're not even beyond your mid-30s. How can I make you a CHRO? Right? So the question is, in the new world, can we look at more examples and experiences of greater risks, greater bets, greater willingness to look at building a leadership pipeline and funnel better? Can we unleash more leadership and restrain positional leaders? Can we actually look at redundancy of leaders rather than making them consultants and advisors in the same company, even after you've retired? Because somewhere it then smacks of a vested interest, right? And the overarching thesis of, therefore, leadership beyond leaders and look beyond yourself is really the answer to recognizing that the new world needs us to think differently, to think bold. I don't think you have a big recipe list of ingredients. That has always been the same and will always continue to be the same. You can bake the cake with a little more of this, a little more of that. But the question is, are you willing to be more experimental? Are you willing to take better risks? Are you willing to think different? Are you willing to challenge your own historical paradigm? Are you willing to admit that my thinking on leadership itself has got jaded? And it's in that context, and it is in that rethink that we will get more appropriate answers of what the question this afternoon was on with the evolving role of leaders. I don't think the role of leaders is necessarily going to stop evolving or is going to be very different. It is still to influence and inspire. It is still to kind of use less power and command and control and designation to get things done. It is to deal with more ambiguity. It is to get a lot more people to work purposefully and collaboration, and so on and so forth, and which is not very different than what it was earlier. But the question is, our hiring lens is not about just changing the lens. It's about rewiring our own minds. And unless we rewire our minds, and unless we repudiate a lot of our own jaded historical thinking, which continues to pervade, though we talk about the newer things, I don't think we act what we talk. And it is in that dissonance that the world still continues, or much of the world continues to struggle. So I will hope that post-COVID and through COVID, at least there will be a newer spark of leadership, a newer willingness to be vulnerable, and a newer willingness to look beyond oneself and look at different combinations and practices of how the entire hiring mechanism and the hiring framework and the hiring outcomes will be, which are more appropriate to the new situation. So I'm going to stop here. And, as always, I'll be very happy. We don't have the time for a Q&A, but I'll always be very happy to hear comments and feedback on any of the social media platforms. Thank you very much, and have a great evening ahead.